Hey, welcome to the Star Wars Unlearned podcast. My name is Josiah Shuett, and I'm joined by Nathan Hawley. What we're doing is we're looking at Star Wars from the perspective of its creator. So we're turning off our fan brains and really just trying to uncover the story that Lucas is trying to tell. We're in the middle of our series on the Phantom Menace, where we explore the filmmaking, the history, the mythology, and everything else that Lucas and his team used to bring this first chapter of the Star Wars saga to life. So join us as we dive in and unlearn what we have learned about the Star Wars story. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Let's do it. All right, man.
Yes.
Hit me up. I'm waiting.
So,
I'm waiting. Here we are,
okay.
Jedi Temple.
Yes. So I'm going to spend a ridiculous amount of time on this first shot because
okay, I'm excited.
I love it. I love this shot because there's so much storytelling. Lucas put so much storytelling into just this one shot, and it's a perfect example of how filmmakers put their story on screen. Because people think I thought this as a kid that I can make a movie. It's not that hard. It's gonna be easy. And Lucas said, yes, making a movie is not that hard, but knowing what to make a movie about, that's really hard. And it's only when you know what your movie's about that you can even begin to create a shot like this. So because you learn so much about the Jedi in this one shot, and we haven't even seen them yet, right? So now, at this point, we don't even know it's
just
a Jedi
to clarify
temple.
though. Are you talking about the temple, or are you talking about like when you actually see the Jedi? Which or all
the temple?
The temple.
Just
okay.
the opening shot of the temple. We don't even know what this place is yet. We don't even know who we're going to see next.
Gotcha.
But
okay, now I'm with you.
This shot gives us clues almost immediately. So,
okay, lay it on us, man.
Yeah. So this, at this point, we don't know even though it's a Jedi temple. We don't know what this place is, but immediately there's some things we know about it, and all we have to work with is just the architecture and the geography of the scene. But it's more than enough because the architecture is completely different from anything we've seen on Coruscant so far. Right? Coruscant has been this very Art Deco, very modern looking cityscape. It looks like New York, it looks like Chicago, it looks like Dubai, it looks like any modern city you can think of. And the architecture reflects that. The architecture here, though, this looks ancient, this looks old, this looks like a temple, right? We know what a temple looks like. We know that instinctually because the design of the Jedi Temple draws on these very, very old and very, very ancient and embedded ideas. So it looks like a place of worship. We know that because it looks like the temples in our world. It's a pyramid, it's a ziggurat, it's a Mayan temple, right? That's what it is. It's a stepped pyramid.
Oh, wow. Man, I never thought about that. There it is.
Right?
Okay.
And also this pyramid, if you look at it in the shot, it's the tallest thing for miles around. So in any direction, this is the tallest point. So what's the significance of that? Like, why did Lucas want it that way? Well, because that's what temples are. Temples are always set at the highest point. That's what a pyramid is. You can think of it as an artificial mountain that people climb up metaphorically, right? Metaphorically speaking. And the reason you want to journey up to the top of the mountain, at least in the ancient way of thinking, is because the mountain is the place where you encounter God, or in this case, the Force.
Closer to heaven.
So that was the ancient idea. Yeah. Because the gods live in the sky, right? Like, why do they live there? Because we can't go there. And all the monsters and the dragons and the demons, they live in the depths of the sea because we can't go there either. So we couldn't access the sky. We couldn't access the ocean depths. And so those became the boundaries of the spiritual world, right? And the ancient cosmology. So So you can't access the sky. So the closest thing you can get to that is a mountain peak. That's why mountains are so important in mythology in the ancient world, right? Mount Olympus, right? Or Mount Sinai, right? That's the place we encounter God. So, and all over the world, you see temples of all kinds on tops of mountains. And I'm not sure if this was Lucas's view, but the Star Wars Locations book says that the Jedi Temple actually sits on a mountain peak. And so so like the last bit of the actual planet of Coruscant, the highest point was where they built the temple. So I like that idea because it's very consistent with the picture that Lucas is painting here. Don't know if it was his, but I like the idea a lot. But yeah, so if you don't have a mountain to put your temple on, you make an artificial one. And so like the Mayans put their temples on top of a pyramid so the priests could perform their rituals at a height that brought them closer to the gods in the sky. And this is really interesting. The Egyptians, well, really interesting to me. I'm sure everyone else is bored by this point. They're like, this is a Star Wars podcast. Why are we talking about Egyptians? But
no,
the Egyptians, when they built the pyramids at Giza, the pyramids were tombs, but not exactly. So the Great Pyramid was covered with polished limestone, except for the very, very top piece, the capstone of the pyramid. And it was called a pyramidion. So the pyramidion was covered in gold. And so it would reflect the rays of the sun. So when the sun rose, the first thing it would hit would be the top of the pyramid. And so it would glow, it would shine, and everyone would see that for miles around. And so why do that? Why is it important that the first thing the light touches is the gold at the top of a pyramid? Because it's the highest good, literally and metaphorically, right? The most valuable thing we have, we should put at the highest place possible. So because the top of the pyramid is also the holy place at the top of the mountain, right? So that's where you encounter heaven. And so the Egyptian pyramid is not just a tomb, it was a personal mountain for the pharaoh that he could ascend to be among the gods when he died. So the top of the pyramid is also the holy place at the top of the mountain, like I said. So at the top of this pyramid of the Jedi temple, we have spires, we have these towers. I think there's 5. I guess I can't see my screen right now, but I guess you can see it. But
yes,
I think there's 5. But it doesn't matter how many are. Yeah, but I guess it's 5. So in the next scene, we'll see the Jedi are at the top of one of these towers. And so what does that mean? So it means that they deal with the highest good. The light side, the good side of the Force is the highest good. And that's why they're up there. So Joseph Campbell said that the thing that informs the society is in the tallest building. And so you look throughout history, everything that's important to our societies, it's usually in the center of the city or the village, and it's in the tallest building or structure. So at first, it was a shrine, and then it became a temple, and then it was or a church, and then it was a cathedral, and now it's an office building, right? That's the world we're at right now. So that's the trajectory of our world of what we value.
Yeah.
What informs our culture, our society. And it's the same thing that actually happens in the Star Wars galaxy, right? So right now, the Jedi and what they represent are in the tallest part of the tower. Even though the Jedi aren't actually in the tallest tower, there's, like I said, there's a plurality of towers, but they don't put themselves at the very highest one.
Oh, interesting.
So, which is good, right? Because it means that they haven't put themselves in heaven. They haven't put themselves in the role of God at this point. Just like there's a round table of sorts in the next shot when we see the Jedi. There's a humility literally built into the structure. There's no head of the table. There's no completely powerful senior member of the Jedi Council, just like that in the temple itself. They don't put themselves at the very, very top.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so there's a humility built into the structure itself. And so, but they're still pretty high up there, and so the journey of a Jedi takes you from the bottom of the temple to the top, right? So symbolically, a Jedi climbs the pyramid. So the younglings train within the temple at the bottom, like we see them trained at the bottom of the towers in the Clone Wars, that the training ground where the tree is, that ancient tree. So the younglings start out there, and when we see them and they go up, they move up the levels of the temple, of the towers, until eventually you become a Jedi Knight, and eventually you become a Jedi Master, and you're with the Council at the very, very top. So
never thought about that.
But above that, you don't go to the very, very top, because you're not elevating yourself to a god at that point. So what is at the very, very top? That's the question. What is in that highest tower?
Yeah.
So what is the Jedi's highest value? Life, right? That's what the Force is. They've devoted their lives to studying the Force, which is the energy of life. It is life. So whatever is in the top of that tower, we never actually get to see it, but whatever it is, it represents the preservation and the flourishing of life. And so that's a great thing to elevate to the top, right? A lot of the source books actually in the visual dictionary say that the Jedi's original texts, their sacred texts, are what's up in there at the very, very top. I don't know if that's an idea Lucas had or if it came from someone else, but it's certainly consistent with with the picture he's trying to paint here, right? And so it's a super cool idea. I really like that idea. I hope it's true, because that's a really interesting and consistent idea.
I was going to ask if the archives are up there. Yeah. I'd never thought about
it. Yeah, no, the archives are deep in the temple, but
okay.
Cool. That'd be a cool idea. But I guess like the most sacred idea, if this idea is true, it's like, the most sacred text, they don't leave that for the archives. This is like something personal to the Jedi themselves, not just galaxy-wide knowledge. It's something personal to them that they put up in the very, very top. But that has to do with the Force, probably. Maybe the first, person to record, like, I just connected with this thing, this energy called the Force. I don't know. I'm totally speculating now, but that's just, it's either way, it's a cool idea, whether it came from Lucas or not. But yeah, what else?
I never even thought about all that. That's so cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was saying. So the trajectory. Sorry, I'm just giving you a fire hose right now.
No, that's what we're here for.
I'll shut up in a second. But I just wanted to get this out, because this is just, it's cool, and it tells us a lot about the prequel era of the Jedi in ways that I was really wrong about for a long time. But anyway, the Star Wars. So the Star Wars trajectory, like I was saying, follows the same trajectory of what is valuable to a society, right? So, because in these movies, the Jedi and what they represent, the good side of the Force, the elevation of life, the protection of it, the flourishing of it, is what is in the top of the pyramid. It's the highest good, literally. Again, it's the first thing the light touches, right? But then when's the next time we see a tower on a quote unquote dead artificial planet like Coruscant? It's the Death Star and it's the Emperor, and he's at the top of the tower. There's no sacred text.
Interesting.
He hasn't elevated anything else. He's put himself up there.
Wow. Right? And it looks like the top of this tower, like their highest tower. I never even thought about that.
There's not a plurality of towers. There's just one.
Wow.
And he's at the top of it. It's a Tower of Babel issue, right? Like, what was the problem with the Tower of Babel? Is like, well, if we encounter God at the top of a mountain and I make my own mountain and I'm at the top, then I'm God. You know, they didn't want to encounter the highest good. They wanted to become the highest good. And so Sidious has built his own Tower of Babel that he's put himself on top of at the very peak. He's put himself at the peak of the holy mountain in this picture. So, and as you're talking about the archives, you know, the temple has so many different parts to it, right? There's a library, there's training rooms, there's meditation rooms, there's a hospital wing, you know. But the Emperor's tower is just a tower. It's just there for himself. He's up there, nobody else. There's no library, there's no knowledge, there's no humility anywhere. It's nothing but selfishness elevated, and he's ruling from there. He's a dictator. He's a tyrant, ruling from the top of that tower. So power in his mind is the highest good, and that's why he's put himself up there. So that's what the temple shows us. You know, it's just this very first image we get, that this is a place that we can tell by looking at it. It's a place that contains something sacred, something important, and whatever is at the top of this is good. It's the highest good. And so we know that whoever we're going to see in this very next scene, this next shot, they must represent the highest good in the story. Yes, they got issues, they got problems, yes, but the prequels they're not about their failure. They didn't cause the Republic to fall apart. They didn't fail Anakin. They didn't create Vader. They do fail at a lot of things, but it doesn't mean they're to blame. The prequels aren't about the Jedi's failure. It's about Sidious's success. And we see and we can tell that just by looking at this first shot, that whatever's here is clearly good. And you can look at the Senate building much later, and you can tell just immediately that it's corrupt, just in the first couple shots of it. So anyway, that's my done. I'm done rambling about the Jedi Temple.
No, that's
I just really like that, how much work and effort George and his artists put into just the design of it, and how much they're calling back to stuff in our world, right? Because we talked about so many things in Star Wars that are out there and alien, and we can't really tie it to anything in our world, but they were very specific about making sure that the Jedi Temple here was something that evoked very, very old and ancient ideas that meant something to us. And so we can learn all this stuff just by looking at the fact that it's a temple and all the different meanings that it has. So, and we can, again, compare it to the Emperor in 5 movies down the road. But
man, that's so cool. I never even thought about it. Like how the temple, the pillar looks so identical to Palpatine's on the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. Wow, that's crazy. Huh. Or the ziggurat comparison. Oh man, that's so cool. Wow. And that's the beauty of movies, visual storytelling. You literally tell a story through a picture. That's amazing.
And I was blown away by the while you're thinking of that, last thing I'll say is I was blown away by that. I was watching Return of the Jedi commentary, and Lucas he straight up said this tower is reminiscent of the Jedi Temple Tower, except there's just one, and it's Palpatine. I thought, whoa, I never thought about that before. So that came directly from the commentary.
That is so cool. The intentionality that is just put in. I mean, I know I say it like every time, but it's just amazing to me. It's just so amazing. Yeah, it really is masterful artwork. Okay, so follow-up question. In the Clone Wars, there is an unfinished arc that Dave talked about with the Jedi Temple being built on top of a Sith temple. I want to know your thoughts on that and what you've heard George say about that and what that plays into it. I don't know if that came way later, like if that was an idea George always had or if it came later, but do you know anything about that or have anything to enlighten us with on that one?
I was hoping you'd ask because I was considering including this in my initial description, but I was like, no, I'll save that. It's kind of a slightly different topic, so I'm very glad you asked that question.
So you will test me.
So
that's awesome.
I'm afraid I might have to disappoint you a little bit because I don't know anything George has said about it
Okay. That's
specifically.
okay.
But the idea did come from when George and Dave were working on Clone Wars. It's not something they came up with later. So it's an idea that he was signing off on. But yeah, so the idea is that this temple, maybe in addition to, or maybe they're replacing this idea. Again, I talked about it being built on the top of a mountain. This could be contradicting that or could be part of that. I'm not exactly sure. But all the information we have is about this, what you're referring to is that in that arc, they would have discovered a Sith shrine at the very, very base, very under, the spot on Coruscant that's deep, deep below underneath the temple. And so, so it's a very old idea, right? Like a lot of churches are built on pagan sites. And the fact that it's a Sith temple, I think kind of sets up, this is me kind of reading into it, but I don't think it's too far off, if I say so myself. if I can pat myself on the back a little bit, I think this is pretty what they're going for here, is that it sets up the idea that something ain't fresh in Denmark. There's a problem here at Coruscant, and that Coruscant has this deeply hidden evil into it that the Jedi are constantly trying to defeat, and they're and overcome, but eventually they lose, and the Sith retake this site, right? Well, one Sith does with the 501st behind him, marching up the stairs. So so the idea is that George talked about that there was no Jedi or Sith war, like there wasn't thousands of Jedi and thousands of Sith fighting each other, but that the Sith were in power for a very long time, and they were the dominant force. And then the Jedi took over, and so part of that was they were led to assume that they constructed this temple over the place where the Sith were ruling from, or at least a spot where the Sith were, and they turned that into the center for the highest good, like we talked about. So I think that arc and the significance of that Sith shrine being at the very base of it would be a picture of the fact that there is a Sith presence. It's a I guess an architectural or geographical image of what's happening with the population of Coruscant. Most of the people on Coruscant are not Sith, but there's two Sith, or at least in this movie, that are on Coruscant. When we see there is a small Sith presence that goes unnoticed, and you don't pay attention to it. It comes back and rears its ugly head, and it takes over. So it'd be interesting to see in that arc whether or not the Jedi were aware of that. If that was a revelation to, I think it's Ahsoka and some Jedi go down there and they dig it up. I'm not sure if it's if that's something that she just discovered, or something that there was like a lost secret of the Jedi that no one knew, or if Yoda knew about it. It'd be interesting to see how that arc would have played out. But yeah, I just like the temple is such a symbol for these films. Again, because it's especially with this idea that it started out as a Sith place, the Jedi took it over and tried to make the best of it. They built a center for the highest good. They built a temple for that, place of worship, place of study and knowledge, and that is burning in the third film, right? That gets destroyed, and that we don't see the temple again until Return of the Jedi, and there's just a glimpse of it in the background, and it's in the same shot as the statue of the Emperor falling, right? So there's this image of the power of the Emperor falls, and there's this brighter future, hopefully, on the horizon where the Jedi do come back because we see the temple again. It's kind of like when we don't see Naboo again until the end of the story, because that's when life and wisdom has come back to the galaxy with all the things that Naboo represents. So,
oh wow, yeah,
Boy,
that's cool.
So I don't know what George thinks about all that, but those are, I think, some ideas that it seems to be consistent with the picture he's painting about Coruscant, the Jedi temples, with that Sith shrine thing. So
interesting. Yeah, there's a couple thoughts here I have just in light of Clone Wars, and the reason I give Clone Wars so much credit is because it is kind of stamped by George. And so we've talked about this before, but I kind of view it as G level canon,
yeah,
George level canon. So in the Clone Wars, there's that. It was, to be fair, it was an unfinished arc, but it was in the works.
Yeah,
but
so they might have changed things here and there, but in the final product, but it was at least something like that we would have seen.
Yes, definitely. So George was definitely aware of it. And then there's a couple other things. Number one, there's in, I think it's season 2 of the Clone Wars, you see the last exposed mountaintop on Coruscant. It's kind of like there's like a park surrounded by it. So that made me think about that when you said like we don't know if it's the highest or not, but it was interesting that it's like the last exposed part of the actual planet. It's kind of cool in this little like courtyard area.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I do like that area. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows up quite a bit. It actually shows up in Mando season 3. But
Oh, really?
side,
Oh, I think
total
I've
side
seen
note.
photos of that. Yeah, I need to see. So I know all the fans listening will totally lose respect for me. I haven't seen Mandalorian season 3. I'm really behind. At this point, it's been out for like a year and I haven't seen it, so I need to catch up. But.
Yeah, it's okay. What was the other thing I was going to ask about? I don't remember. So in comparison with, okay, well, let me back up. I have 2 more thoughts. This is all coming from Clone Wars. So do you know, did George approve the Darth Bane stories? I know because the reason I ask is in the Yoda arc in season 6 of the Clone Wars, Darth Bane appears. Now it's a Force of Vision. It's not actually him, but anyway, that's a whole different can of worms. But, and he says in there, he says to Yoda, do you know why I'm famous or why I'm remembered? And Yoda says, yeah, you were the one who made the rule of 2. And so I wondered if George kind of changed his mind over time and sort of went with that story, where it was like this idea of like thousands of Sith and then Darth Bane narrowed him down to 2, or if that is, I know that's a big nod to the novels, which George never really considers canon at all, but he sometimes picks and chooses from them, things he liked. But do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so I didn't know this until very recently, but I always assumed Darth Bane was from, like the stories. But George actually came up with Darth Bane back in the 90s.
Really?
Yes. And I didn't know this until very recently. Yes. So when he was working on the backstory for episode 1, figuring out how, the Jedi got there, how the Sith got there and everything, his idea was that the Sith tend to, eat each other. They tend to, fight amongst themselves and try and gain power over the other ones. And so when there's a lot of Sith, that's not going to last very long. And so it's going to get boiled down eventually to just a couple. And so Darth Bane institutes the idea of the rule of 2 so that, the Sith can survive for that 1,000 years until they show up again. Or for some, George kind of uses a different time period. He's not, when he's asked questions in interviews, he's not, he doesn't have all of his notes in front of him. So sometimes he changes how long the Sith were in power for 2,000 years, 3,000 years. So, and he's put on the spot a lot of times. So it's not like we need to take every single quote. Like this is exactly what he meant. Cause sometimes he contradicts himself by accident, so
and he changes it. Yep.
Yeah. And he changes his mind. So I can't remember exactly. Let's see. I might have a quote from him here.
I could so see George doing that. Well, today, it's 2,000 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Where is this? Do I have it somewhere? Oh, here we go. So this is from the archive book. And so this talks about, I think, how the kind of Sith got, how they fell the first time. So yeah, he says there was never a war between the Jedi and the Sith Lords. The Sith Lords were in control for a long time. And what happens when you have a world full of Sith Lords, they start killing each other to see who's going to be the top Sith Lord. They don't vote, they just kill. It's the medieval feudal system. So then the Republic came to power and the Jedi brought peace in the galaxy by being ambassadors and troubleshooters. So, and then he starts talking about the Republic and the Jedi. So, yeah, and then in other places he talked about, why the rule of 2 and all that. So I think the idea is that when the Sith dwindled down, eventually Darth Bane instituted that rule. But so that being said, so Darth Bane was an original creation of George's.
Wow. But that's cool.
Of Lucas's, but I need to stop saying George. I don't know the guy. Of Lucas's, but that doesn't mean that all the books and legends and stuff were what they said about him were true. So basically, the only time we see him on screen though is the Clone Wars, and so that's the only stuff that George has signed off on, as you say, with Clone Wars. That he approved everything that came out of that. So that's the only Darth Bane stuff we get. Yeah, is from George. Okay, story wise and character wise. So and that's all I know.
Okay, there's not a lot of backstory in that scene with Yoda, so it would definitely not contradict anything. Yeah. Wow, interesting. I did not know that. That's so cool.
Oh, here we go. I got another quote. Yeah.
Sorry. No, hit me up.
Let's see. Actually, it's in my notes labeled Darth Bane, so hopefully this pertains to that. So, One of the themes throughout the films is that the Sith Lords, when they started out thousands of years ago, embraced the dark side. They were greedy and self-centered, and they all wanted to take over, so they killed each other. Eventually, there was only one left, and that one took an apprentice. And for thousands of years, the master would teach the apprentice. The master would die. The apprentice would then teach another apprentice, become the master, and so on. But there could never be any more than two of them, because if there were, they would try to get rid of the leader, which is exactly what Vader was trying to do, and that's exactly what the Emperor was trying to do. The Emperor was trying to get rid of Vader, and Vader was trying to get rid of the Emperor, and that is the antithesis of a symbiotic relationship, in which if you do that, you become cancer, and you eventually kill the host, and everything dies. So yeah, so I'm guessing. So I'm not sure. Wow, I wish I knew where this quote was from. I didn't attach a reference. Oops. Anyway, but the so that when he says there's only one left, that one took on an apprentice. It's been. I'm pretty sure that from the sources I've read, and that Lucas said that was Darth Bane.
That must be Darth Bane.
It seems to be consistent with what Clone Wars says. So yeah.
So
that's
awesome.
At this point, that's all I know about Darth Bane. So
wow, that's so cool. Oh man, that's so cool. And it's good to know this from George, and that he thought this out. I would love to hear those stories. Man, that'd be so cool to hear what he originally thought and how that happened. But that's not really a reality anymore. But still, it's cool we have that. Okay, so then my follow-up question then is, we do get a small glimpse of a Sith temple in that Yoda arc. And it's very much like the one in Rebels, even though Rebels isn't from George. Dave definitely used a lot of that. So I want to hear your thoughts on the design between the Sith temple and the Jedi temple. Because the Sith temple is very pyramid kind of structure. This one's more pillar blocky. I mean, there's definitely some pyramid arc or look to it, but yeah. Do you know anything about that? Has George commented on that and the different designs and things like that?
I'm not caught up very well on that particular temple. That might be something where I have to do some homework and get back to you. I don't really know. You remember what episode that was? Was it the Destiny?
The very last episode in the Yoda arc. I don't remember the name of it.
So I could pull it up right now, and I could pull it up right now and just give you my initial thoughts on it. See if it reminds me of anything I've seen. I mean, there's a lot of like this black pyramid style. That was, I think, one of the first times we see it was in a piece of concept art by Ralph McQuarrie on Yavin. Actually, it was going to appear on the temple where the rebels hang out. I think was actually going to be more of a dark side, like Sith place. It's the very last one. So Sacrifice. That's right. I should know the name of that episode. Let's see if I can find that moment, because Yoda's on Malachor in this episode.
Moraband, I think, is the official place. Yep.
Moraband. What did I just say? Malachor. Where's that?
Malachor. That one's the Rebels one. Where they're
Rebels. Okay. Yeah, I got confused.
Mm-hmm. The only reason I know that is because I just watched it with my kids like 2 days ago. So.
Well, you're good, because I was gonna see. I was making sure, like, don't say Korriban. It's the one that starts with the M.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, that's the wrong one. Korriban.
Yeah, because Korriban's from the games, right? And then George changed it to Moraband. Something like, I don't know. That's a geeky side note, but
yeah,
like, I think. What on earth are you guys talking about?
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
this podcast is not for my mom, because she's completely lost at this point. This particular episode. Yeah. So, Mom, if you're listening, yes, Korriban is supposed to be the ancient world of the Sith, and George changed the name to what did you say it was? Moraband?
Moraband. Same thing, just with an M instead of a K. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a D at the end of it, right? Moraband, I thought.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not
Good
sure.
question.
I like that it's more, because it's it's the Latin for like death, like more like.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Memento
cool.
Mori, like remember death.
Huh.
More. So I like that, because it just seems, it's a world of death.
Wow, that's awesome.
Because Yoda finds like the sarcophagus of Darth Bane or whatever it is. Well, this is a lot more of this episode than I thought. Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on this, because I want to take my time and look at that, and look at what they say about that episode and the design of it, because I don't know off the top of my head. I was did not factor that in my research. Oops.
No worries. We were just talking about temples, so I was just curious about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a good. It'd be interesting to see how they compare, because I'll probably learn something about both of them by just looking at the differences. So that's a great thing to look at. So yeah, I'll definitely do some homework on that. And I have this idea. I think once we finish episode 1, we should do an episode where we kind of go back and revisit the things that we didn't really have time to talk about, or things that we didn't quite get an answer on, just to kind of like the stuff to tie the bow on episode 1, where it's like because you asked me a lot of questions that I just straight up on the spot failed to answer. So I'm like, I'd like to have a chance to redeem myself and be like, okay, since I couldn't answer them then, I've actually done my research here, and because because you had some really good questions and stuff like this, it's like I'll be interested to compare the temple, and I'm going back through Clone Wars now and trying to become more better acquainted with that show and more familiar with everything that's in there, because I've watched it a lot for fun and pleasure as a Star Wars fan, but I haven't researched it and studied it as much as I have the movies. So I need to go back and do that, and stuff like this would be a great candidate for that. So so I think that might be fun to do an episode.
That'd be really fun
episode, just to kind of all the stuff we missed at the beginning. So anyway, all that to say,
episodes.
Yeah, exactly. Just so we're actually, where I don't on the spot fail to answer or respond. Because I never answer, just respond.
Geeky questions.
No, because there's some good stuff in there.
Yeah, it's fun.
And just anything else that you and any thoughts that I have at the end of the movie. Just it'd be nice to kind of talk about something that isn't constricted by, because I like going scene by scene and shot by shot. But it'd be cool to have, let's talk about the Jedi throughout the course of the whole film, or talk about the Sith throughout the course of the whole film, and just kind of have any big picture, like maybe have like a big picture episode where we just kind of look at the movie as a whole and any loose ends we want to tie up. But anyway, that's just an idea I had.
That'd be great.
Before we move on to episode 2, whenever that happens, if we ever get there. We're going so slow. We've done one shot so far. We've been talking for
when we're in our 40s. We'll hit episode 2. Yeah, it's okay. It's been worth it. I love it. Every minute.
But yeah, I think I guess you were talking. Anything else you were talking about? What do you have? I guess what are your thoughts on that Sith temple? You said it's also pyramid shaped, so that's interesting.
Oh, on the Sith temple?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be really curious to learn the difference, because I do find it interesting, just as you're talking, like to see how the pillars, the Jedi temple comes to a flat top essentially, and then you have the pillars, whereas the Sith temple is so pyramid like, and it just pyramid all the way to the top. I'd be curious to know what the design or the intention behind that design is. My initial gut reaction, based on zero research or knowledge, just as a nerd, is that what you were kind of saying is how the Jedi temple really portrays that plurality, and it's like we're equally trying to reach the top, with the different pillars. Where yes, we all grow, but we all grow to a certain spot, and then we all try to just I don't know. There's this plurality, but the Sith temple is like, no, there's one guy on top. It's a pyramid. Like we're all one. Like it just all goes to the one guy who has the most power ruling everything else. That just seems very Sith-like to me. But I don't know. I mean, you could argue that with the design of the Sith or the Jedi temple too, because there's one tower that's taller. I mean, I don't know. That's just my hunch. But yeah, I don't know. Because look at like all the holocrons from the Sith. Everything's pyramid, all these sharp triangle angles, and the Jedi tend to be more block kind of shapes, circular, things like that. So I don't know if that's an intention, or George's like, hey, that looks good, let's do that. I have no idea. But
I think you're probably onto something there. Yeah, because you're right, because the Jedi do have a the it's like an unfinished pyramid, kind of like the back of the US dollar bill, where it has an unfinished pyramid with the eye at the top of it. It's like that, and it doesn't come to that sharp, aggressive point. So I like what you're saying, that it looks more dangerous, looks more sharp and aggressive, that the Sith version does, and that their holocrons have that same design. Because it's more aggressive. It's Darth Maul's head has points on it. He's got little sharp horns. Like it's very dangerous, and you could cut yourself on that pyramid, as opposed to the Jedi. And the Jedi, it's much more friendly, and because it's still, it shouldn't look aggressive, right? Yeah, it should look like a temple. It should look like a place that you ascend, like you're metaphorically climbing the temple to encounter the Force. So that's a good observation. That seems to be in line, in track with everything else. But I just pulled this up here because I forgot. Like, the other spires, other towers have names, and I'm trying to think. So the other four spires contain important council chambers dedicated to governing the order. Aside from the high council chamber, there is the Council of First Knowledge, the Council of Reconciliation, and the Reassignment Council. So interesting. That's other things that they have up there. Other councils. And again, that's like from the source books and the visual dictionary. So these are close-ish to George, but they had a lot of freedom and to add things. So who knows if that's how he looks at it, but obviously he signed off on there being other towers. So you would assume that something else is also important important is also going on in all of those towers as well. So anyway, it's a good observation that the towers, that it ends at a base, that the pyramid stops and it gets cut off, and from there the towers, it's a plurality rather than the Sith pyramid coming to one point. I do like that idea. Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think. We'll see. I guess I'll have to do some research.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see what you find. So, because George at least approved both designs, so I'd be curious to know. So it may be as silly as like he just liked it, or there's deeper meaning behind it. So yeah, I was trying to look up in our visual dictionary too. I was trying to see if there's anything on the temple that it's not even in this book. It's like, oh, failure. Where is that? But that's the old DK one, like just on episode 1. So
yeah, I looked at that. I think I have both the old one and the new one. I don't know if it appears in the new one either. But yeah, I had to look at the locations book where I found the piece about the temple being built on the top of the mountain. That was from episode 3. That was an episode 3 location diagram of the temple, because episode 1, it just basically just showed like the Jedi Council Tower, which to be fair was basically all we saw of the temple. So it makes sense in that movie. Anyway, yeah. So
it's also interesting, as you were talking, I've never really thought about the temple being inspired by real life temples. So I think it's so cool. The ziggurat thing from ancient Babylon kind of thing, but also like those pillars are so reminiscent of the one in Constantinople or in Istanbul.
Right.
And I cannot remember the name of that temple. Shame on me. I'm a history major. I should know this.
I can't either. Oh man, I should know this too, because what is that? It also kind of gives me Taj Mahal vibes a little bit too. But yeah, what is that place? Oh, that's gonna drive me nuts.
I know.
I have Google. Why not?
Yep. But it was really reminiscent. I never thought about that. I never thought about that, and I never thought that being kind of the highest point in that shot. And that's just really interesting to me. It makes sense, and I could also see later, especially when we get to Clone Wars stuff, where the public starts to turn their turn their nose up at the Jedi. They start looking down upon them, like this is all their fault, and Palpatine's really good at kind of manipulating their public image. How you could see the people who are down beneath them looking up, be like, oh yeah, the Jedi and their nice ivory towers, their nice comfy Coruscant, and I could see that, and because we do that in our day and age all the time, we look down upon the guys who are up in the high towers often, like us versus them and things like that. So I don't know. That's just, again, I don't know if George had any of that in mind, but that's just stuff I've thought, and I've often just read upon it. That's my own interpretation of a lot of it, particularly the Clone Wars. As one who is in religion, a Christian, I'm a pastor, and we get that. I've experienced that a lot. People like you guys are just out of touch. You don't know what you're talking about with the real world. You're stuck in your books, in your seminaries, and so I could easily see that happening here in the Star Wars universe as well. So anyway, there's a few thoughts as you were talking.
Cool correlation. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I like that a lot. Hagia Sophia or Hagia Sophia.
Yes. Thank you. I am so ashamed I didn't remember that.
No, you're. I should know that too. I had a really. Yeah. Okay, maybe you should be a little more ashamed than I should be, because I haven't written papers on it, but I did know that. I did research that at some point for some reason.
Really reminiscent of it.
Yeah, totally. Actually, I was gonna say I have some quotes from like the Art of books and the making of to talk about the design of the temple. So let's see, this is from the Art of book. The one exception to Coruscant's predominantly Art Deco style is the Jedi Temple. Lucas wanted the place where the Jedi were to have a sacredness to it, as well as a daunting dose of grandeur. As a result, the Jedi complex is a bit of Gothic, a bit pyramidal, pyramidal, and a bit of Chinese Forbidden City. That's also a good. I forgot about that. That was very similar to that. Yeah, this is from the making of. In contrast to the corporate coldness of the Senate building, the Jedi Council architecture was designed to suggest a place of worship, a place that was both religious and monumental. For reference, Chang took pictures of monuments from various cultures, then exaggerated their shapes and heights in his drawings. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Hagia Sophia was part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I could definitely see that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And here's the quote from the commentary that Lucas had. So the Emperor's outpost on the second Death Star is a tall spire. It's reminiscent of when you see the first three movies of the Jedi Temple. In this case, there's one spire on the Death Star, and the Jedi Temple has 5.
Do you know, I've heard this in Legends, and it's kind of been just sort of murmured throughout the Star Wars fandom for years. Did Palpatine, has George ever commented on if Palpatine basically made the Jedi Temple his headquarters? Do you know?
Yeah, I looked into that, and yeah, it's an idea that started in Legends, and it's made it work, and I think it's part of the new canon now that he definitely did. I think it shows up in the Tarkin novel or something, one of those that it kind of shows up in. And I remember, you know what, this was part of my research for this conversation, and I can't remember exactly what Lucas said about that, or if Lucas said anything about that.
Yeah, I've never heard anything official, so I was wondering if you heard.
I think my instinct right now is to say no. I don't remember him saying anything that specifically that the Emperor took that over. I think it's a good. I think it's a good image that the Emperor takes that over.
Absolutely.
Especially like he were to knock down all the other spires and just have that one like he does in the Death Star. But that'd be a good image of it. But I think there's also like some debate about some inconsistencies about. I think Kanan at some point says that the temple was completely destroyed. But then later on, within the same canon, the temple is still erected, still there. And we see at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Yes,
so it's hard to say if it's still there. So hard to tell if it's slightly different or not. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that one. I'd have to. Okay. I don't think if the idea did come from George, I don't think I've heard him talk about it. I think as far as I know, I've only seen it in connection with Legends and the new canon. So
it would definitely line up with what we know of Palpatine, right? I mean, at any emperor, like you're gonna sit on your enemy's throne, you know, like I've conquered you. This is mine. I've won, you know. But I don't know.
I can also see him wanting to destroy it too completely. So it's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But like you said, we know he didn't because it's still there in Return of the Jedi.
Yes, it's true. He didn't.
But who knows what he did to the inside? His interior decorator probably, you know, he could have done quite
a lot of red going on, as we talked about last time. Yeah, I remember seeing an image. I think it was from a comic book or something, but it was an interesting idea where, it was a Jedi temple, but it had these big, long red banners with like the black imperial, which looked like Nuremberg. It looked like the Nazi, those 3 like famous like flag, those 3 banners. So I thought, that's a really cool image. I don't know if that's.
I thought so too.
I don't know who drew that. I'm like, that's a good idea. Probably what it would kind of look like.
Yeah, I remember.
It's also sad, it's just seeing. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say I think that's in the Darth Vader comics that came out early on. I think so because I that stuck with me too. Yeah, but it was a really sad image.
Well, it's just it's a sad image of seeing this place again that was the center of the highest good. It was a place of the heroes. It was a place of the Jedi, the highest of morality, and it's just been and it's that image. The reason it strikes a chord and why we think of the Nazis is that that's what the Nazis did. They took their blood red flag and put it all over. Places that used to be free of their oppression and evil, and turned it into those, and they turned it into the opposite of what it used to be, and made this place of this den of thieves, right? A horrible place. So, so it is. I think that was a cool image. So, I do like the idea of the Emperor taking over the temple.
Yeah,
but who knows? Who knows if Lucas that was his idea? Yeah, there's so many things where it's like this showed up here, but maybe Lucas, it's his idea and no one's that hasn't come to light yet, or maybe it's completely not his idea and someone else came up with it. But that's the fun thing is like when you see stuff that's in Legends or in the new canon that do line up with Lucas's vision, it's fun because you're like, well, maybe Lucas didn't come up with that idea. I had come up with that idea himself, but it is in line. It's consistent with the picture he's painting, so it's a fun little addition where like that feels like the Star Wars that George was trying to create. So. Yeah, so it's fun when we can see things like that. So maybe this is an example of that, where it seems to be in line with that idea. But anyway,
definitely. Okay. Well, a few follow-up things. Well, I think I just got one. Well, actually, I'll say this because I think I heard George say this. Maybe Dave, maybe it's Dave. But every time we see the temple, they're very intentional about the lighting and the weather, and how that's always supposed to kind of portray where they are and portray sort of the foreshadow, like what's coming, or the cloudedness, that kind of thing. And I was just watching this scene here as we get into it in episode 1. It's clear, it's sunny. The sun's still up. But like in Revenge of the Sith, it's the night is falling, like Anakin sitting in that tower. We'll come to it, but you see the sun setting, and then they're right there. Yeah.
I guess people can't see my background, but I have a Jedi Temple background, and it looks like, I'm not sure if it's from Revenge of the Sith, but it looks very similar to Revenge of the Sith, like what you're talking about, where it's kind of cloudy, it's dark late in the day, and there's just some sunlight streaming in, but it's not bright and sunny like we see here.
Yeah. And if I remember right, episode 2 is the same way. It's all rainy. It's dark often. We don't see a lot of light, but we'll come to that. But yeah, here it's bright and sunny. They're still on top of the game.
Yeah,
the light is still mostly raining. Yeah.
Yeah, the Republic hasn't fallen yet, and the Jedi Order is still intact. It hasn't been the temple, and we literally see the temple in flames. It's at one point, right? When it's nighttime.
It's nighttime.
So that's the worst it gets. Yeah, for sure.
Where the dark side has fallen. Yeah, the shroud of the dark side has fallen. So I wanted to point that out. But also, I was going to ask you if you had heard anything from George on how the Jedi came to power. Like why are they involved in legislation? I don't know if that's the right term, but they're
involved in diplomacy.
Senate.
Yeah,
diplomacy. There you go. And they're really tied closely to the Senate. They're on course. Do you know how that came to be? Is that just something George just kind of thought was cool, or is there a history there we're unaware of? Or
let's see. That quote I was reading about the Sith does go on to talk about the Jedi. Then the Republic came to power, and the Jedi brought peace into the galaxy by being ambassadors and troubleshooters. So when the Senate decides to do something, or the Jedi Council discovers something that's amiss, the Jedi fix it. The Jedi don't like to fight people. They're monk warriors. They're monks first, and they try to convince people to get along. And if you don't comply, your hand comes off. I love that. They use their power to keep the government of all the planets in line so they don't do terrible things.
Which, by the way, a lot of people lose hands in Star Wars.
Yes, that is Jedi do. That's the first thing they go for. Absolutely, Jedi and the Sith love those limbs.
Right. Yeah, when you read that quote, I was really interested because I was like, man, there's a huge story there. But we already know there's no war, at least between the Sith and the Jedi, that made that transition of power. And just like it seems like the Jedi were in existence based on what George has said. But I don't know. It's really vague. And I was wondering if you knew some more details.
Well, it seems like, basically, we can kind of piece it together based on what he says, right? Because he says that the Sith dwindle down and because of infighting, so there's only one left. And then the Sith, we know the Sith have been in hiding, like literally in this scene where we've still haven't started yet. The Jedi say, "No, it's not your fault. I'm the one who got us stuck on the first shot. I was the one who wanted to spend forever on this first shot, but
and it's worth
I'm
it.
glad we did. Yes, but was it?" Kiadi Mundi says the Sith have been extinct for a millennium. They've been in hiding for that long. And Darth Maul says, at last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. So I guess the idea is that the Sith went into hiding because they lost their power, and Darth Bane and I guess Plagueis and Sidious are the only Sith's names we know of since then. But that their whole scheme was, okay, we're going to bide our time, and the Jedi go to power, and we're going to take it down eventually. So yeah, I guess the Jedi, it seems like they didn't seem to have much opposition, I guess, based on what George said when they took power, or didn't take power, but they're, it's not like they're ruling, but they're when they're working with the Republic to build it up and bring peace and all that, seems like they didn't have a ton of opposition from the Sith because, they haven't seen one for 1,000 years. So, so who knows if now that could mean that the Jedi were in power before that, and the Sith fell apart. That they just went into hiding 1,000 years ago. It's not that they. It's not like 1,000 years ago the Jedi Temple was built. We don't know, but yeah, it seems like there was obviously overlap that the Jedi know what the Sith are, but that they've gone into hiding. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know exactly. I don't think it's ever really stated how the Jedi came in. It's just that for 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights have been the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. So. Yeah, I have to look and see if George says anything specifically about the early history of the Jedi, but I don't know off the top of my head. Again, I take a half hour just to say, I don't know, Nathan. And I need to just say that instead.
That's okay. It's okay. I learned some things from that. That's definitely not worthless. But I was just curious on how do they throw in their lot with the Republic? You know, how do they get into authority? Like, why are they not just some monks somewhere else? You know what I mean? Or like, how do they become to be ambassadors? How do they? Yeah, I mean, because it kind of seems like just using medieval stuff. Like these guys are almost like the knights, literally, for the king. You know, for his, in this case, chancellor. You know, they're the guardians. And it's an interesting idea, which is I'm really sad we didn't get to see. Is I'd love to see what they do after Return of the Jedi. You know, when the Force is back in balance, do they throw their lot back in with the Republic, with the rulers, or do they stay separate? So I don't know. I was just wondering if you heard anything on that, or maybe not. So, because I remember as a kid, I'll give a little context to this. I remember as a kid going, "Wow, this is so foreign to me," because the Jedi, all I knew of from the original trilogy was just there were a couple random guys out in the middle of nowhere, Luke and Obi-Wan and Yoda. There was no formal anything. Like I never would have even dreamed they were part of the Republic in light of like this high up, I guess is what I mean, in this role. I'm not criticizing it. It was just really a surprise to me. So I was wondering how, or if you heard anything or why he chose to go that route.
Yeah, I know I've come across quotes of his and interviews and stuff where he has touched on that. I don't know if he ever gives a super clear answer. I don't know if he's ever been asked that question, but that's another thing I could do some homework on. And I can come back to you with maybe at the end with that episode we were talking about, because I think there is some more to glean from that, from what he said about the Jedi, and I don't know if I don't have that off the top of my head. So, but I think he's touched on it a little bit. So maybe it wouldn't be a complete answer, but give us something to go on. Maybe we could construct a bigger picture from that. But
okay. Well, and I'll say this too, and tell me if you've heard anything on this, if George was inspired by this, but just being a pastor, and I've studied religions, all of them, a lot, just in history. When you see pretty much any time that a religious institution takes power, problems happen. That's the whole thing behind church and state being separated. Like they do so much better when they're not in power, and they tend to get in trouble. And that's not just Christianity. That's all of them. And it's just an interesting thing. So I was just curious on if George is kind of picking up on that, because that'd be true in a lot of mythology, I would think, and religion and stuff, that when they marry the state, basically problems happen. So I was curious on if you heard anything on that.
Well, it's interesting because this is kind of getting into something that I was thinking we might talk about today. But I've been thinking about this for the last several months, that Lucas kind of seems to be, as far as I can tell, that he's very clearly separating the Jedi from the government. That although they are they work with them, the Senate they're an extension of the judicial department of the government. Like those guys, those two pilots we see at the beginning of the movie, and that ship that they arrive in, those are the judicial forces. I can't say that word, judicial forces.
It's okay. I get that.
Yeah. tongue tied. So they're connected, but the Jedi keep themselves at arm's length, right? From the politics, because, and this is a thing that I don't know whether this was a fan theory or whether this came from a book I read or a video game, but I know I'm not the only one who thought this, because I've seen it everywhere, and I had to really, really re-educate myself on this. And actually, listening to our earlier podcasts, I realized that was pulling things out of my butt, wasn't actually representing what George, I think, does in the movies very well, where I said things like, the Jedi are too political, or they're too, they're all just using their head and being logical and not being passionate. And I realized that now that I've really had a wrong idea about that, because, the Jedi do keep because George doesn't just tell us these things. He shows us this in the movie, and we'll see this a lot in episode 2, where the Jedi keep themselves at arm's length from the politics and the government. They don't like where the Republic's heading, but they don't really have any power to stop it. And so, Obi-Wan is very critical of politicians, right? He says, Anakin, she's a politician, not to be trusted. Or in episode 3, he's like, no, I'm too brave for politics. He never wants to see. We see it in Clone Wars episodes too, where Obi-Wan's just like, no, and Mace Windu says in I know for sure in the Liberty on Ryloth episode, where Orn Frita is talking about Cham Syndulla, he's my political rival and we shouldn't trust him. And Mace Windu goes, I'm gonna leave the politics to you. I'm gonna do what I can to help save these people. So they really don't like what's happening, and that it's the Clone Wars. Actually, it was what um, puts the Jedi in a really difficult position. That at this point, they're not really doing anything wrong, as far as George is concerned. Even with Anakin and all that stuff, that it's the Clone Wars that really is the problem for the Jedi, because they're drafted into service. They're not. They don't choose. They're not like, oh, we're arrogant. We'll become generals. They don't like it. They don't want to do that. They're forced into it. And so they like, well, we're sworn to protect the galaxy. So this is the pretty much the only way we can do it right now. So it's really uncomfortable for us, but I guess we'll have to be generals. Um, and so, these are all things that I think we as Star Wars fans know, but we can very easily kind of accidentally slip into language of, the Jedi are, they're too political, or they're too, they're too harsh. They fail Anakin, they fail the Republic. And it's like, no, it's Sidious's success. It's not the Jedi's failure. They are blinded by the dark side. The dark side clouds everything. And so, so I do think that George was trying to put up a separation of church and state in that sense, where he was trying to show that the Jedi were not on board with what the politics as they were happening. Like when Palpatine gets his emergency powers, you can see Windu and Yoda kind of watching helplessly, going, and Mace Windu goes, "That's it then. I guess we got to deal with this now." They're not voting for it. They don't have a say in the Senate. They can't change anything, but they're not happy about it. So I don't. So it's a cool idea what you're suggesting, that and it's true that when church takes power, when church becomes politics, when religion takes over politics, it's usually spells disaster for a lot of people, because it's just not what it's meant to do. And I think there probably is hints of that in this, but I feel like George tends to go the other direction, where he's trying to say that it's the Republic that fails, and the Jedi get caught in the middle of that, and it's not they're not actually. It's not the Jedi taking over, or not the Jedi's influence that causes problems. It's the Sith working the puppet master pulling the strings, I think. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's so I don't know. It doesn't, the idea of the, state becoming a religious one in this story. My instinct is to say, no, I don't think that's exactly what he's going for, but there might be shades of that here and there. But it just seems like he's trying to really keep the Jedi and the fall of the Republic as a separate thing from the fall of the Jedi. I don't think they're as connected as I would have originally thought.
Okay, so let me see if I'm catching this right. You're kind of saying that, like,
good luck deciphering that ramble. But
that's okay. So you're kind of saying that really, like, here in episode 1, the Jedi are doing okay. Like, this is sort of the peak of their, I don't want to say power, but the peak of their existence, their order. I don't know. Maybe we can say that. And so Palpatine, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, Palpatine seems to be playing an awesome chess game where he manipulates them into the corner to go against their ideals. And I think I remember George saying that in that archive book a little bit, where it's like, well, maybe you and I talked about that too, where the Jedi are now stuck. They're in this corner where it's like, well, we either help the Republic by joining the war and leading the war, or we abandon them and just doom them to death. What do we do? Because both, like, either choice makes us go against our ideals. So, and what you're saying is, it's not that Jedi necessarily sought out to fail. Palpatine moved them into such a way where they did fail. Is that kind of what you're saying? So in the sense of, like, Mace Windu, if Palpatine was never on the scene, maybe it wouldn't have been such a jerk to Anakin, but he became a jerk over time because of what he was kind of forced into. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense. They're slightly different in my mind. So
he became a jerk, but I guess I want to clarify this. He became a jerk because he was forced into what and by who?
Yeah, so, like, Palpatine's, like, pushing Anakin onto the Jedi Order. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to be my representative. You're going to be, you're doing all this. And so, and Mace Windu is really a jerk in the movies. And I'm wondering.
See, that's one of those things where I don't know if I agree anymore, because I think I used to think that. And my suspicion now is that Lucas didn't really intend that. We've kind of read that into the movies a bit. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm still in the process of this, but I don't know if he's a jerk. I just think he's very an intense guy, very serious, and that I don't think he does anything that's particularly mean or wrong, but that Anakin sees it that way a lot of the time, and so that has kind of led the audience to kind of see it from Anakin's point of view. That's all I'll say about that. But sorry, I just wanted to clarify that because that's I'm not saying that, and I'll let you continue.
No, that's okay. That's good because with that, like as kind of what I'm saying, like if Palpatine was never on the scene, Clone Wars never happened, nothing like that, that Mace Windu would never have come off that way. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like yes,
that's a
he's
good
still
point.
strong and he's blunt and he's very dedicated to the order and the rules, but and so I think like and what I'm kind of he's just an example. But I think what you're saying is like without all the Clone Wars, without all the dark side, without all the manipulation, we wouldn't have seen a problem with Mace Windu and Anakin. So it's not necessarily Mace's fault, but he's been pushed into a corner with all these situations that he's acting in such a way to Anakin, at least to his point of view, that he is a jerk. You know what I mean?
Yes,
And it's easy
yeah,
for
I agree
Anakin
with that.
to interpret it that. And Mace Windu is being forced into this, you know, where he's like, I don't want you on the council because we're breaking our rules, but we're going to comply because we kind of have to. But Anakin's interpreting that as like, you're being unfair. You're such a jerk, you know? And us as the audience are kind of seeing Mace in that way. But from Mace's point of view, he's just doing what he has to do. You know, does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah,
But
I think I am on board with that. Yeah, and I think you're right.
that
And
seems to be what you're saying to me.
yeah, basically, and this is something that I've tried. This is what I've kind of. I'll try and sum it up and be more succinct than I have been here. Is
It's
that yeah,
okay.
I
It's
agree
a
with what
big
you're saying.
concept.
I think that yeah, and that's the thing is like this is a that's why I was so excited about the temple shot. Is like this is such a tricky thing because it's so important to get this right. If we don't get this part right, the rest of the story is not going to be as obvious or not going to make a whole lot of sense. If you don't understand what the Jedi are and what the Sith are, really, it's going to be a mess. And so, and it's so easy to think like I know what the Jedi are, I know what the Sith are, but I think I was wrong about a lot of it. So, yes, I think the idea is that it's Sidious's influence that causes all the problems, and it's Anakin's decisions that fail him and fail the people around him. It's not the failure of Obi-Wan. Because I brought this up in past conversations we had where I think Obi-Wan, I said like Obi-Wan was a bad father or a bad father figure, or a bad teacher for Anakin. And it's, I think, no, without, it's Sidious's influence that ruins things. Without Sidious, Anakin would have been fine. He would have turned into Qui-Gon, right? He would have been a bit of a rebel, a bit of a maverick Jedi, but he would have been a good one. He would have been a great one. And Obi-Wan didn't do anything wrong. Um, even when, and because maybe it's just things like, you know, as a Star Wars fan, you can take things so. I'm rambling again. I thought I said I was going to be succinct, but I'm moving on to another subject. Bad Josiah, bad Josiah. But when
No,
Obi-Wan,
man,
I'll
it
just
all
close the
matters.
loop here. When
It all
Obi-Wan
matters.
says, you know, I failed you, Anakin, I failed you. That's his belief, but it doesn't mean that's what actually happened.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I need to hold
Mhm.
those things lightly and realize that, you know, characters have opinions. It doesn't necessarily mean that every character speaks the absolute truth of what the situation is. Like, and exactly what you said, you put it really well with Anakin's perspective on everything and how he sees what Mace and the rest of the Jedi and you know even Obi-Wan in Episode 3 and how they seem to be maneuvering things against him when actually it's Palpatine who's put him in that situation. So yes, so I think that's a very important distinction to make, and that and a very, very important statement is that if it weren't for Sidious, things would be fine. The Jedi wouldn't fall. The Jedi aren't doing anything bad. Or at least that's going to cause Anakin to fall. And actually, we see that in this movie because Sidious isn't involved with Anakin yet. It's hard. I forget that a lot of times, but yeah, the Sidious's manipulation of Anakin doesn't really start until Episode 2. And so at this point, as we'll see, even though that scene can be kind of taken in weird ways where Anakin's being tested by the Jedi, and it's hard to. Sometimes it seems like when they say we're not going to train him, it's like really, you know, that seems harsh and seems wrong. But there's a lot that makes sense about what the Jedi say there, and we get put in this really weird position where both Qui-Gon and the Council are right when they say
Yes.
that
Yep.
when the Council is right that Anakin shouldn't be trained, that his anger, that he's already too old, he's had too much anger in him already because of his relationship with his mom, because obviously that leads to the downfall of the Republic and the Jedi Order. But Qui-Gon is right that he sees the chosen one in this kid. So that's the really tricky situation that we get that Anakin is put into there. So yeah, so I think it's just, yeah, that's a great point that you made, that without Sidious's involvement, things are fine. He's the extra piece that's added that ruins everything. And that the Jedi themselves aren't inherently corrupt or, they have some, like as we see in episode 2, particularly we see it shades of it here. They have some arrogance to them. They're blind to a lot of things. Like in the scene where we should actually talk about this scene where Mace Windu says, I don't think Sith could have returned without us knowing. And Kiadi Mundi going, it's impossible. They've been extinct for millennium. That's not necessarily arrogance on their part. It's just that, they have no reason to believe the Sith are back, but that turns into arrogance maybe later on as things get more and more complicated in the galaxy in episode 2, where Yoda says to Obi-Wan, like, well, a flaw more and more common among Jedi, right, is arrogance.
Yep.
By that point, Obi-Wan, it's Yoda looking at Obi-Wan saying, hey, buddy, you're a little arrogant yourself, by the way. You're saying your Padawan is, but you're not so great yourself, and none of us are perfect. And that's why the Jedi aren't at the top of the temple, right? That's why they're not at the top of the spire. That's why I thought that image was so important, is that shows us that the Jedi, as great as they are, they know that they have some flaws and some faults, and they're not going to risk putting themselves at the very top. And so the danger that happens is when the Jedi actually start to take, that what Mace Windu, when the words of a Sith Lord are in Mace Windu's mouth in episode 3, when he says he's too dangerous to be left alive, or when Anakin says, that's not the Jedi way. And it's like, of course, Anakin has his own selfish reasons for saying that. He's a bit of a hypocrite because he just killed Dooku, the day before, whatever it was. But it doesn't make him wrong. It doesn't make Mace Windu right. That, Anakin actually has two bad decisions to make there. He doesn't really have a good way out of that scene. So,
yes.
And that's, that is a failing of Mace Windu, failing of the Jedi, but that's not the foundation of why everything falls apart. So it's George made such an intricately crafted story here that I've been very confused by it many times and not even know it. I thought I understood it. Like you said, we've learned this throughout this podcast. You and I have learned things like, whoa, I never caught that before. I thought I knew these movies, and I don't as well as I thought I did. There's a lot of stuff we do know, but we're constantly being surprised by it. So that's a really cool thing it's sometimes uncomfortable. You're like, oh, really? I got to rethink my whole view on this, my whole paradigm. But it can also be really fun when you learn stuff like that. Exactly. Yes. I'm not going to sell anybody death sticks, I don't think. But hopefully it's not going to ruin me that much. But so it's we want to get these things straight, and so that's a great point.
Yeah, and that's part of why we started this podcast. Is we want to try and learn Star Wars the way George meant it to be. Like, this isn't just, hey, this is Josiah and Nathan's thoughts on this. This is like, our goal is to uncover what did George mean by this? Let's get back to the roots of it. Yeah. So, you and I have both been learning things and having our perspectives changed, and that's great. And that's kind of why I wanted to spend time on this now, because we're introducing the Jedi, and I think these themes are so huge, that they're just going to set the stage for the way we talk about them later, with things like the temple and the aesthetics and how they got the power. So it may seem like a bunch of detours today, but I think it's really important, setting the foundation for how do we view these guys, what are the role they play and how they get here. And and I think you're really right on that. That it's how do you want to say this? That the Jedi have been forced into a corner and forced to, like you said, the best they can do is make a bad decision. So that goes against their ideals, and it just crumbles, which is just such the genius of Palpatine, and just like, I'm going to put you in a trap. There's no way out, like, you can't get out of this. You're going to break your morals somewhere. And he just plays on that. And you just see, the Jedi between this and episode 2 are so different. Like you said, there's a bunch of arrogance creeping in. There's blindness. There's, by the time we get to Clone Wars, my goodness, they're a mess. You got several Jedi dropping to the dark side. They're, Barris's whole story, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's corruption now in the Jedi. A little bit of it by the time the Clone Wars ends. Yeah.
And that's what makes sense. If you guys have seen that episode with Barris and Ahsoka, at the end, she's telling straight truth. We're an army who's fallen from the light, fighting for the dark side. And that's why I basically joined the dark side, did all these acts of violence. That's just the trap they're in. It's such a beautiful picture. Or sad picture, I should say. But yeah, and it's from the audience, we're trying to sympathize with Anakin, because I feel like a large part of this prequel story, including the Clone Wars, is Anakin's story. So we're kind of seeing everything from his point of view in a lot of ways. And so, like, for example, just seeing Mace Windu again, it's like, well, I think we are supposed to feel, in a sense, that he's a jerk, but we're, because we're supposed to see it from Anakin's side, but we need to be understanding, like what you're saying, like, well, it's not necessarily who he is. It's just kind of who he is in these manipulated circumstances. He's coming across that way. And we're supposed to see the hypocrisy of the Jedi. We're supposed to see, that maybe wasn't there before, but they've been forced into it. It's kind of like, never mind. I'm going on. But I think that's what you're saying. And I think we've picked up on that, but maybe you're right. Like before we were always like, oh, it's just the Jedi. It was their fault. But now it's like, oh, no, there's more to it than that. They're reacting in not good ways in a not good situation. So I like what you said. It's more of Sidious's, how'd you put it? It's his,
it's not the Jedi's failure. It's Sidious's success.
His victory. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even though the Jedi they messed up. They made mistakes. We can't deny that either. But yeah,
that's what the main story isn't their failure. They do fail, yes, and they do make mistakes. But that's not they're not to blame for everything that happens. It's the main story of the prequels is the failure of the Republic, and it's not the failure of the Jedi. It's the failure of the Republic through the influence of Sidious, and it's his victory. Yeah.
Which is exactly, George, he said in that archive book, he said, I wanted to tell a story. How can a good person become evil? And how could a democracy become a dictatorship? And that's, he's just echoing what has happened so many times in history, so it's a really neat, brilliant story that unfortunately goes over a lot of our heads, mine included. I've learned a lot. Like if you would have asked me, I think even I've said this before at the beginning of the podcast, like, I would have said, yeah, the prequels is all about the Jedi's failure. And it's like, well, no, we have to learn more about that now. It's like, well, no, it's Sidious's victory. Yes, part of that is the Jedi's failure, but it's not the Jedi's failure that's driving all this.
And that's the point of that first shot of the temple. Yeah. It's like we're supposed to take away from the Jedi when we see them, when we're first introduced to them, is that they represent the highest good. That they're serving life. They're serving the Force. They're guardians of peace and justice. And when they mess up, and we call them out on it. But that's the main takeaway. That they're the ones. Why else would they be at the top? Why else is the society elevating that to the highest good? At least they should be, right? That's visually what we see there. That's what temples are for. And so, that's why I thought that image was so important, was to get that idea across, that despite their flaws, the fact that they're human. That's what we see in this movie. We learned that the Jedi are human in this movie, right? Because we just saw that for the first time when when Qui-Gon went up against Darth Maul. Up to this point, they've been invincible superheroes, and we were like, yeah, he's got, with Anakin, like no one can kill a Jedi. But then, oops, the God can bleed, so it's not a God. The Jedis they're not as high on the pedestal as we thought. And then at the end of this, we learned that in the roughest of ways when we lose, the Jedi we've been with from the very beginning, So yeah, that's a good point. And and it's important, I think, that's why I think it's important to to get all this stuff in our heads and figure out and be consistent with it. It is because, Lucas's purpose in Star Wars is the purpose of all mythology, which is to pass on the knowledge and the morals and the values of the society. And that's what mythology has always been that way. And that's what that's the tradition George was continuing with Star Wars. And so if we don't get that, if we can't figure out who's good and who's bad, if we can't figure out who's really to blame for all this, then we're going to miss the point. We're going to be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And that's what he saw, that was a part of our culture that was missing, that our stories were no longer, there weren't specific stories that were there to pass on the values and the lessons, the cautionary tales, right? That went away with Westerns and, adventure film, the swashbuckling, Robin Hoods and pirates, all those classic stories and fairy tales and legends. We weren't telling those much anymore in the 70s. And so George wondered, well, is that because those are no longer relevant, or is it because there's a problem and we should be telling those stories. And so he ran this little experiment called Star Wars, and turns out, yeah, those ideas were still very relevant, and they still are today. That's why we still care 40 years later. It's not that X-wings and lightsabers aren't cool. We love those, but again, I'm a broken record, but I say this all the time. That's why I put all this thought into this podcast, and why you are putting so much thought into it. That it's not just fun entertainment. There's lessons to be learned here. And you as a father, you have kids that you're supposed to be passing on values to. And it's like, how do you do that? They don't always listen to lectures. Sometimes you need a story, and sometimes that helps really a lot. So yeah, I think
so
if
powerful.
We're gonna learn from these values and morals that George is trying to put into these stories, and we're supposed to pass on what you have learned, as Yoda says. Then we need to make sure we get it right. So as painful as that may be, or hard as that, as difficult and intricate as the story is, we got to figure it out. And I have a blast doing it, so I'm glad we do it.
Yeah, me too. Oh, I still have a lot of balance questions. I still want to know what balance is and what's not, but we can get to that another time. Let's get to these Jedi.
We'll yeah, exactly. We can't make it. We got to make it through just more than one shot on this episode.
We got to make it more than 5 seconds of the movie.
Yeah. Well, and I was thankfully I anticipated this. I was like, I think we're going to be stuck here for a while on this topic.
Oh, it's okay though. Important. So good.
But I'm very happy we did. We are. But
I'm thrilled. Anyway, so let's get to the Jedi, man. I want to hear your thoughts on this. We get our first introduction to the Jedi Council.
Yes, and so we've only seen 2 Jedi up to this point. And as I pointed out before, and today and previous, that the knights, they're in a round, right? They're the knights of the round table, right? There's no head of the table. There's no clear leader. Obviously, we have Yoda and Mace Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi are the prominent ones, but there's a plurality of towers and spires. There's a plurality of leaders and council members, and at this point, we don't know. You've never seen Yoda before, right? This is our introduction to Yoda. Yeah. So we don't know if you're watching it in order, we don't know to pick out him and be like, oh, he's clearly going to be the best Jedi, the wisest old, we have no idea. And in fact, it's so interesting. I wonder, for people who've never seen Star Wars before, if Mace Windu actually takes more of a prominent role. Because actually in the script, it says that Mace Windu identifies him as the senior member of the council. Let's see.
Mace, you mean? Mace identifies Mace.
Did I say that? Yeah, Mace. So
yeah. Huh.
So the script says, interior Temple of the Jedi, Council Chambers, day. Qui-Gon stands in a tall, stately room. 12 Jedi sit in a semicircle. Interesting, not a circle. In the script, at least. Obi-Wan stands behind Qui-Gon in the center of the room. The senior Jedi is Mace Windu. To his left, an alien Jedi named Ki-Adi-Mundi, and to his right, the Jedi Master Yoda. Now, what's interesting about that is I don't think Ki-Adi-Mundi ends up being on Mace Windu's left, right? Isn't he on Yoda's right, and Mace Windu is on Yoda's left?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Ki-Adi's on the right, and Mace on the left.
Yeah, so I think George probably switched it so that Yoda was. I think maybe originally Mace Windu was going to be the Grand Master Jedi, and then George decided to change it to Yoda. I don't know, but either way, Mace Windu is singled out as being a senior member, if not the senior member of the council. So he's obviously important. Anyway, but the scene's so cool. I have some other thoughts, but I gotta access my notes because I have them in different areas. So what do you think? You give me your thoughts on it first before I.
Well, first quick question: are those the only 3 we hear talk in the movies from the Jedi Council? I think it is. Just Mace, Yoda, and Ki-Adi. I don't think we hear anyone else. I mean, obviously Obi-Wan, but
right. Good point.
I don't think we hear anyone else, right?
I think it's in Clone Wars. I thought about that before. I think you're right. Yeah,
we start to hear them, but
I think you're right.
I don't think we hear any other Jedi leaders in the whole series.
Yeah, I think you're right. Safe to say you got that right, huh? Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, I was curious. I'm pretty sure because I remember in the Clone Wars hearing all these voices for the first time. It's like, whoa. That's what Plo Koon sounds like? I never knew that.
That's true. Yeah. Plo Koon just stands there with his hands folded the entire time. Or sits there with his hands folded. I always loved, is it Yarl Poof, the guy in the background who just like bobs his head back and forth with a super, almost Kaminoan looking dude. It's so distracting to me. Every time I watch those shots, all I can look at is just his head bobbing back and forth in the background.
Was it Kelly? Someone asked me, it was Kelly or my kids that asked me, is that a Kaminoan? Or I think they just assumed that was a Kaminoan. I was like, I don't think so, but
no, he's not.
Wow,
I know that.
I never picked up on the association before. Yeah, interesting. So, This is interesting too. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So I've never picked up on the fact that they're in one of the lower towers. I always thought they were in the center tower.
I did too
But
for
as
the
I'm
longest time. Yeah.
yeah, that's crazy. But now as I'm watching this, you can just kind of look around in the background and you can see them. You can see the other towers and they're on the same level. So they're not like up above. That's interesting. I'd never noticed that. So anyway,
Yeah, you really see
side
it
note.
in the scene where Anakin is denied Jedi to be trained, where it's dark, it's at nighttime, and you see in the wide shot, it's not as wide as the shot establishing shot here. You get to you're closer to the towers, and you see the Jedi Council in one of the towers, and you see this gigantic tower next to it, which is the tallest one. Um, and I thought this was wrong. I thought for a while, I think I invented this little in my head because I thought that the Jedi were originally in the tallest tower in some version of Phantom Menace, but then they added a tower on the side because it was inconsistent with the design. Like the center tower has a different look to it, but and there's an inconsistency there, so they decided, oh, the tower we put them in looks like the other ones, so we'll just say that they're in one of those instead of the actual tallest tower. I think I made that up because I can't find any record of that online. I thought I'd heard that or read that somewhere, or I thought that they changed a shot, and maybe I'd like to find out that I'm right, but but I don't think I did some research on that, and I don't think exactly. I don't think I think I must have just made that up, as you do when your memory's faulty. You can totally create these things in your head. So anyway, not that that's super relevant, but yeah, you're right that I always thought they were in the tallest one too. But then I look at it, go, oh no, that one doesn't have any windows, so I don't know how they would.
Nice little detail. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to take us off there, but yeah.
No,
yeah.
That's a good point.
And I love, again, just how clever he is. I mean, you just look at these characters and go, wow, there's a story behind every single one of them. It's just so neat. It was so cool. I remember in Clone Wars when it first came out, it's like, wow, it's so fun to get to know some of these other Jedi. It's just fun to see. But anyway, total side note. So
here we're talking
about, go ahead.
Yeah, so just another quick little side thing before we really dive into like the story of what's happening, but is that I think in the early source books and everything that kind of came out around this time of the council was that Ki-Adi-Mundi was the only member of the council that was actually a Jedi Knight and not a master. He hadn't taken an apprentice yet. And wasn't given the rank of he was not granted the rank of master. So obviously George changed the idea so that it was a blasphemy to Anakin. It's like, what? You're not going to make me a master? That's never been done before. He says it's never been done before in the history of the Jedi. So obviously that's not true anymore. But I think at the time I just remember thinking like, oh, it's interesting that Ki-Adi-Mundi was sort of the newer one or the new kid on the council. Maybe he wasn't the new guy, but he at least hadn't taken an apprentice at that point. And does he have an apprentice in Clone Wars?
Ki-Adi-Mundi?
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever seen one.
Yeah.
No.
In the comics, he had an apprentice that was a Tusken Raider, actually. Tusken Raider Jedi.
Oh, wow.
That Anakin really butted heads with. Anakin did not like him at all for obviously reasons. But, and technically, well, here's a huge spoiler. He's not actually a Tusken Raider. He's a human who was raised by Tuskens, but it's this whole story of Anakin having prejudice against him because he's a Tusken Raider.
I've heard of that.
A Shared Het or something like that is a really weird name.
Yeah. That was a big story in the Legends fans.
Yeah, I have all those old Clone Wars comics and I love those things, and a lot of them don't make any sense with George's Star Wars, but I still like the stories. But anyway, so that's another weird little tangent. But yeah, with what's going on here story-wise, first line right out of the gate is Qui-Gon saying, my only conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord. And that's a big deal because, well, first off, we heard Sidious refer to himself and Darth Maul as a Sith earlier in the movie. So as an audience, we know that he's right when he says that. But the council is like, it's a tough sell to everyone else, right? Because they're like, it's like saying, Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire are back. They've just been hiding for 1,000 years. It's like, that seems really unlikely. So they're not, it's just, it's like I said, it's not quite arrogance yet on the part of the Jedi, but it's just sort of like, okay, Qui-Gon, we know you're kind of out there a lot of the time. We love you, but really? You think that's going to be a Sith? It's just not rational,
Here's another Qui-Gon theory.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's like, we would have seen the Sith coming. Like, that's not something that's just going to hide. They're not going to hide for 1,000 years and all of a sudden pop up on a random desert planet. But I like that Yoda corrects Mace there when he says, "I don't think the Sith would have returned without us knowing." And that's how you know it's not systemic arrogance yet in the Jedi Council, because Yoda says, "Hard to see the dark side is." It's like, don't be so quick there. It'd be difficult to see without that. And again, when we introduce characters, we learn a lot about them, and we see Yoda's introduction here. We learn about him and his conflict throughout these prequels. He's trying to look to the future, like Obi-Wan said in the beginning of the movie. Master Yoda says, "I should be mindful of the future," and Yoda's always trying to see what's going to happen, but the dark side clouds everything. And so he's always trying to look to the future, but he ends up always being blinded by the dark side. And because we learn that it's from Sidious, but he doesn't know why yet. He's still, and it's not as bad as it is in episode 2 right now. But he's just saying that right now he's just saying the dark side's hard to see. But then in episode 2, he's like, the dark side clouds everything. It's impossible to see the future now. And like Yoda says later in this movie, cloud of this boy's future is like, it's hard to tell, but by the time as the movies go on, obviously the Jedi are blinded and Sidious is they're completely in the dark by the time Revenge of the Sith happens. So
oh man, it just makes me want to learn more about the dark side. Like, what does that mean? How can they not see it? What does it all entail? Yeah, there's so much there I want to know.
Well, that's the cool thing, that his name is Sidious, right? Because he is the evil that you don't see coming, and he manifests that, and not just in these huge waves of the dark side that's just like shrouding everything, but it's just every time people encounter him, he always gets to make the first move, because he always blindsides everyone. No one ever sees it coming. Like, you see that in his lightsaber fight with the Jedi when they come to arrest him, right? Like, his first move, like, no one can deal with it, and so he always gets like an advantage at the beginning, because he's they just don't see it coming, even though their Jedi are supposed to be able to see things before they happen. Sidious always flies in the face of that. So
yeah, literally in that
case. Exactly. Yeah, like he practically is it happens quite literally there, that they don't see him coming with his first move, but also his larger plan is also something they don't see coming. So it's just a great, again, just that what's in a name, right? You can learn so much about him just from his name. But there's so much there's so much to learn about the dark side. And Revenge of the Sith will be fun, because we'll really get to dive into that and see, well, how evil is the evil, right? How deep does this go? So I'm excited for that.
Okay, another teaser. I'll wait. I will wait my questions. I'll hold them up.
I say we got to keep some continuity here. We'll save it, and also it gives me a chance to actually prepare for it, because I'm not ready for it now either. I got to do some more research. But
okay, so Qui-Gon then. Continue.
So let's see. Let me pull up that screenplay one more time. And there's some lines here that aren't in the movie that I think are interesting. So Qui-Gon says, "My only conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord." Mace Windu says, "A Sith Lord," kind of like he does in Revenge of the Sith to Anakin. Kiadi says, "Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium." And then Yoda says, "The very Republic is threatened if involved. The Sith are." And Mace Windu, I'll refrain from doing a Yoda impression for now. Mace Windu says, "I do not believe they could have returned without us knowing." Yoda says, "Hard to see the dark side is. Discover who this assassin is, we must." Kiadi says, "I sense he will reveal himself again." And Mace Windu responds, "This attack was with purpose. That is clear. And I agree, the Queen is his target." So Yoda says, "With this Naboo Queen, you must stay, Qui-Gon. Protect her." And then that's when we jump back into the lines that are in the movie, where Mace Windu says, "We will use all our resources here to unravel this mystery and discover the identity of your attacker. May the Force be with you." So there's a nice little exchange there. Where
adds a little
actually,
bit.
we get to see why Yoda, or why Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan kind of stick with the Queen, because he was ordered to by Yoda, because they think that there is a threat to her. Because I used to look at the scene, or look at the scenes coming with the Jedi, where they the scenes that are still to come, where it seems like, they don't believe that there's a Sith, and so they don't send any. They don't really care about what happens to the Queen. So Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon kind of just take upon themselves to stick with the Queen, but it's like, no, actually, no, they do care. They want Qui-Gon to stick with her. It's kind of like an episode 2 situation where Obi-Wan and Anakin are sent to protect the Queen. It's the same thing here with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon now are meant to protect Padme. I never thought about that. Maybe that's supposed to be a parallel, but
that's a good point.
Yeah. So again, it's probably just cut for time, because it's not really necessary. But those are kind of fun little lines we don't get to see.
Yeah, it adds a little bit. I like that a lot. Yeah. Then we get to Anakin here. Yeah. Tell me about that one.
Qui-Gon's still, he's like, actually, you can tell, it's so funny how like hesitant he is. It's almost like you can tell like he's, you know, again, he's the Maverick, he's the rebel, and everyone's like, okay, Qui-Gon, what do you want this time, dude?
Yeah.
Which again is like he's Jar Jar, he's Anakin, right? He's one of those, he's the outlier, where it's like you can get the impression the Gungans are like, all right, Jar Jar, what is it now? Anakin's friends are like, okay, you're building a pod racer, it's never gonna run. You kind of get the sense of the Jedi are sort of like, okay, this dude again. All right, what do you want? And I don't know if that's true, but I kind of get that feeling from it. And you can tell like Qui-Gon's a little hesitant to bring this up because it's a big deal, right? Because he's about to just shatter, talk about shattering paradigms and blowing people's minds. He's about to do that for them.
Again, right? Here's a Sith one, and here's the chosen one.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a big day for the Jedi Order. They're like,
yeah,
the worst thing we can imagine and the best thing we can imagine in the same day. Yeah, but Yoda says, more to say have you? And Qui-Gon says, with your permission, my master, I've encountered a vergence in the Force. I always loved the way Yoda said, a vergence, you say? I always thought that, I always liked, he kind of like almost whispered that, like, whoa. And Mace Windu, and I didn't know what a vergence was for long. I kind of just accepted like a vergence. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that.
I'm not sure either.
And it's, it's a convergence. It's a place where the Force is exceptionally strong, with all the Force kind of seems to be converging. That's the way in one particular spot. The wellspring of the Force, right? The planet, the Force planet, that's a vergence in the Force. Mortis, that's another place. That's a place that's a vergence of the Force. But Anakin, and that's why Mace Windu kind of makes this distinction, located around a person. He says, yeah, it's a boy. So that's very unique.
I never picked up on that.
Why? Because and that's why Qui-Gon's like, I think the midichlorians conceived him because he has such a high midichlorian count, and it's just a kind of technical way of explaining why is this vergence around a person? Why is it so important? Why is it such a big deal? Why is it not this usually a planet, or maybe like a place like Dagobah, right? Like Qui-Gon says in Clone Wars, it's one of the purest places of the galaxy, with strong with the Force. That's probably another vergence in the Force, where the Force is kind of banding, or the Force is just really strong around a certain place. But this is I think the only time, one of the few times, where it's around a person that we see it. So that's a big deal.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, I never even thought about that.
I had neither. I had to look it up. I had to research it.
There you go. I always just assumed that a vergence, I thought he was just meant like the virgin birth. I wasn't even thinking about like convergence.
That's hilarious. Wow. I never thought about that. Oh, that's so funny.
Go.
Yeah, it does sound like virgins.
Wow.
I never thought of it that way. That's funny. Well, it's
has nothing to do with the real, the actual definition of virgins.
Well, because it's spelled like convergence. It's VERGENCE, not VIRGIN. That's funny.
Well,
they're similar though. I wonder if that.
So don't ever listen to anything I say.
No. Well, no, but it's still insightful, because I'm now wondering, like, did George pick that word? Because vergence is not a word that's used very much. I looked it up. I'm like, where is this used? And it's like, I can't remember what it was used, but it's not used in like mythology. It's not a very commonly used word, and it seems
I've never
like
even
a
heard
weird
it
one to
outside
pick.
of this.
Now I'm like. Now I'm wondering, exactly. So I'm now wondering, like, did he pick it because it's kind of sounded like virgin? I don't know.
Wow.
That's another thing. Total random side note, but a lot of people get this wrong, and I got it wrong, and I was very upset with myself when I found out I got this wrong, because it's such a commonly, I'd heard this before. I knew that this was wrong, but I just forgotten it. That when we talked about Anakin's birth, and talked about Shmi, I said that Anakin was a product of immaculate conception, as opposed to a virgin birth. And immaculate conception is the Catholic idea that Mary was without a flaw.
Interesting.
Her conception
I'm
was
a pastor and I
immaculate.
didn't even know that. Gee,
Oh, really? See, I thought I was the last one on board with that one, because I feel like people use that term a lot, and it applies to Mary, not Jesus. And I always hear it applied to Jesus. Well,
I'm glad you're here to tell us these things, Chewie.
I know. I'm sure. That's another. If we're gonna put sound effects on the podcast, I'm definitely gonna have things when I start to ramble. I'm gonna have Han Solo saying "shut him up" or "shut him down." I'm definitely gonna throw that in there, because I know the fans or anyone listening is like, "Dude, get to the point." Anyway,
but it's so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, random side note. That's one talk about virgin birth. I realized I misspoke there. It's virgin birth, not immaculate conception. Anyway, all that to say.
Wow. Now that's good for me to know.
There you go. Yeah, I'm learning.
There you go.
I got to get some.
We're always learning
pastoral knowledge that you can
That's right.
carry with you now. That I got to impart to you. That's fun.
There you go.
Well, okay, where I lost my place. Where am I? Oh, when he talks about it's possible he was conceived by the midichlorians, and so that's a clue to Mace Windu. This is our first time learning about this prophecy. You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. And as we haven't heard that term yet, like balance to the Force. What does that mean? And like you said, that's a big topic, and that's something that we really need to unpack. Maybe that could be part of our big topics episode. Maybe I have to do a couple with Phantom Menace because that's something that I don't have in my head super clear. Like I have ideas, but sometimes like that doesn't. These kind of conflict, and it's a little tricky. So we'll have to.
It is tricky.
Big discussion about that. I can't have that right now. I don't know, but
it'd be good to do because I feel like a lot of us Star Wars fans have really misinterpreted that and not sure what George means. So that would be good.
So too. Yep, that is my assessment.
Myself included. Yep. So let's do it. But no.
Yeah, no, right now I'm still ignorant and dumb.
Me too. Yep.
So you believe it's this boy? He says, "I don't presume," and Yoda calls him out like, "Nah, you do. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't bring this up unless you thought." So,
what was he gonna say? Do you know what he's gonna say? I don't presume to.
He's like, "I don't presume." You believe it's this boy? He's like, "Yeah, I don't presume to, know the will of the Force, maybe, or know like to say that this kid is for sure." But Yoda's like, "No, you're convinced. Otherwise, you're." And he acts that way later, like. Qui-Gon's kind of presenting. He's like, I kind of believe, like I'm thinking, but he's sold at this point. He's like absolutely sure. He's just kind of presenting. He's just kind of softballing it right now, so the Jedi Council doesn't, freak out. He just dropped the Sith bomb on them, right? And so now he's like, okay, let's slowly roll a little bit, slow my roll a little bit. I'm gonna eventually kind of warm them up to the idea that this might be I might think it's the chosen one. But Yoda's like, nope, I can see right through you, as he says to him. Like, no, dude,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're convinced of this. I think that's what I'm assuming he's getting at here.
That makes sense. Yep.
But yeah, he says he requests the boy be tested, and Yoda tells the audience what that means. Trained as a Jedi. We don't know what test, like tested for a disease, like what, and we like really testing him. Yoda tells the audience it means he wants him to be a Jedi, which we kind of knew that because when he left Tatooine, Qui-Gon was like, "Oh, you're going to be trained as," or he's like, "Becoming a Jedi, training to become a Jedi is not an easy challenge." We kind of knew that that's where this was heading, but just to be clear, and Qui-Gon calls, and that's another thing we have to talk about is that Qui-Gon says finding him was the will of the Force. What the heck is the will of the Force? We got to figure that out because that's an important one too. That I have some ideas, but it's also like, oof, this is tricky. So I'm not prepared to talk about that either because that's okay. You asked me about the wills. You another on the spot failure for me was you asked me about the wills several conversations ago, and I was like, I don't know. And so we need to talk about that, and because I've done a little more research, but I still need to do more.
Interesting,
because that's very tied to the will of the Force.
Interesting. I thought it was pretty straightforward. Like, that's just what the Force wants because it happens.
Well, that's the thing.
Sort of a sovereignty predestination thing, but.
Well, yeah, but that's straightforward. Is that's a tricky subject, and I think I always thought so too. But it's like I didn't really think much of it, but I really think about is the Force? Do you have a destiny, or do you have free will? Is the Force something that you have to shape to fit your situation, or do you have to surrender to what the Force wants to happen? Like, and does that mean you're a Jedi or a Sith when you do one or the other? So there's a lot of nuances there that I didn't really think about until I started unpacking what the Force was and how the Jedi and Sith use it. And I go, this is kind of, I don't know about this. I don't know these things as well as I think I do. So that's something that's something I would want to talk about at some point, really kind of figure out what the heck is the Force and how does it work and what's the living Force, what's the cosmic Force.
Oh yeah.
Because that's important going forward too.
Oh boy, yeah, we got some homework to do here, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. This is a big episode. We're learning how much we don't know in this one.
Wow. Yeah, I was always in the impression it was just this is your destiny. It's set. But
yeah, I think there's more. I think there's more nuance. I thought so too, but I think there's more to it than that because George just kind of hinted at there's this. It's a bit of both. That it's
wow.
In that Clone Wars writers room clip where he says we have a destiny, but we also have free will. He literally says that, like, we can choose to follow the destiny, or we can choose to go against it. And it's like, well, what is that, good or is that bad? Like, what do you think about that? And so that that has a lot of implications that I think we should unpack at some point.
Wow. Yeah. Woo, boy. Okay. Yeah. We're gonna need some time after this episode's over to after episode 1 to figure this all out.
And it might take until we get to, Clone Wars, when Qui-Gon tells these things to Yoda, but talks about the living force and the cosmic force and all that, because it's there's a lot, because it is a bit of a side issue. I don't want to say like it's the most important thing ever, but because you can still follow the story, but we know the story as fans roughly, and so we kind of want to get into the details here and figure out how does it reveal things that we totally missed before, because of going on these little side detours can all of a sudden illuminate the main path a little bit more, and like, there's actually more to this than I originally thought. So I think it's worth going down.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. Huh. Jeez, we have a lot of pins up here, man, on the board. We need to.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow, I'm excited.
But I'll keep marching ahead here. Yeah. So I'll finish off the scene just with the script here, because it's kind of a straightforward scene from here on. But he says there's a line that was omitted where Qui-Gon says, "Finding him was the will of the Force. I have no doubt of that." He says, "There's too much happening here." Or it seems too obvious. He's like, "There's too much happening here for it to be anything else." It seems like it kind of, I think, calls back to that line, or it's the similar sentiment, similar idea to that line where he says, "Nothing happens by accident."
Qui-Gon's a sovereignty guy. He really is the sovereignty of the Force. Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, then we get to Mace Windu's line, "Bring him before us then." And Yoda says, and Yoda actually finishes in this when he says, "Tested he will be." That's how it plays out in the script, and so it's a little bit different in the film. But again, it's probably just cut for time. But there's some fun little ideas here and there. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this scene? Now that I've rambled.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just have to say, I do prefer the CGI version of the Yoda than the puppet. I appreciate what George was trying to do, but I remember even as a kid going, "Whoa, that's a very different Yoda."
Yeah, it's true. I agree.
Yeah. And I think you told me this, that he was going for that. He was going for a younger, less stressed out Yoda. We're seeing it's supposed to be different. There's a reason he didn't just take the Empire Strikes Back one and just use it here. But yeah, and we don't need to recover that, I guess, here. But I do prefer the CGI one, I gotta say.
Yeah, no offense to Nick Dudman and all the creature department. They did a great job making, because that Yoda, in a weird way, the original Phantom Menace Yoda looks, quote unquote, better than the Yoda did in Empire Strikes Back, in that he looks more realistic. His skin has that kind of translucency that they couldn't really get back in the day in Empire Strikes Back, but just the design itself just doesn't look like Yoda does.
Yeah.
And he
really
looks a little too young, a little too different. And it just, yeah. And it's I have a weird relationship with that Yoda. Because I grew up with it. Because I grew up with him alongside, like, to me, he's just as OG as the Empire one, because that's what I grew up with. But I did always think he looked weird, because it's math, right? Yoda looks the same in 2 movies, but there's one odd movie out, which is Phantom Menace. We had Empire and Jedi where he looked the same, roughly. He just looked a little sick in Jedi. But then it looked like he had work done in episode 1. It looked like he had plastic surgery or something. It's like, I don't like it. Yeah, and so I do like the CGI, if only just for continuity's sake, right, between episodes 2 and 3. I think that's one of the reasons why George put it in there. And also, yeah, he kind of understood that the puppet wasn't right. And it's so interesting to see. I've talked about this before when we talked about Jar Jar and kind of a deep dive on the CGI versus puppet thing with Jar Jar. But when you have a character like Jar Jar in your film who's very expressive and very emotive, at that point you're like, this is the next level of this technology of bringing characters to life. And so to go back to the puppet with characters like the Neimoidians and with Yoda, it can sometimes feel like, in contrast to Jar Jar and Watto, to have an example of 2 CGI characters with 2 puppet characters, they can look stiff and wooden and not. You're like, why are we still using puppets? And actually, I think Frank Oz, and there's a behind the scenes footage you've probably seen of Frank Oz after having puppeteered Yoda. George is kind of showing me, here's what we're doing with puppets now, like digital puppets, and Frank Oz kind of goes like, "You don't need me. Well, look what you can do. This is crazy." Like, he's like blown away by it. Because you can do a lot more. And so I think that's, once they were able to do that with Yoda, I think they just probably held off on Yoda because they're just terrified that it was going to look dumb and weird. They're going to have like a special edition Jabba the Hutt on their hands, right? Where they had to go back and fix that because he looked too bad. But yeah, when you have when you can do stuff with Jar Jar and Watto like that, sometimes you're like, oh, the only reason to do it with the Neimoidians was a budget reason to do them practical with puppets because they just couldn't handle more CG characters because originally we're going to be basically, like we said, Geonosians.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Yoda, it's like, oh, I'm glad they did the CG Yoda because it works. He feels like he belongs more in that universe more. Just as the Empire Strikes Back, Yoda feels like he belongs in the context of Empire Strikes Back because there's no CG characters there. Even though I don't mind the CG character additions to the special editions, because we see that throughout all Star Wars. We see puppets and digital characters mixed together through all the movies. It's just that. It's what can you get the most character out of? And 1980, it was a puppet, a practical puppet, hand puppet. But in 1999, it was digital technology, and it continues to be that way now. And so I feel like the puppet is kind of only done now. Like it's interesting. Like Baby Yoda is an interesting example because he's kind of half and half. Grogu fan. I know his name's Grogu. I'm a fan. I promise. I know these things. But from my mom who's listening, Baby Yoda, she doesn't know what Grogu is. He's interesting because he's like half and half CG and half puppet. And for him, it was a real decision. Just like it was kind of practical was the way to go because it was, cost effective. It was cheaper than constantly having CG characters because you don't see a lot of CG characters in the Star Wars live action shows just because it's very expensive and takes a long time. And since they have a schedule and a budget to keep up with, they just can't really do that as much. But also there's that nostalgic factor, right? We like seeing, I love seeing Puppet Yoda. I don't look at Empire Strikes Back and look at Yoda and go, oh, he looks bad. He looks like a puppet. He still looks like a character to me. I still buy it.
Yeah.
I'm
right there with you.
It's just one of those things that now when you can do a CG character, to get a more nuanced performance, when you choose to go the puppet route, sometimes it can kind of feel like a step backward because we're in the time we're in now. Like I remember I felt that with Maz Kanata in Force Awakens. I felt that she seemed much more alive and much more a character in Force Awakens than when she's a puppet in Rise of Skywalker. A puppet with some CG CG touches here and there. I felt like, yeah, okay, that's good because I felt like she was really stiff in that movie. So maybe it works for a lot of people.
Wow, interesting.
But I noticed I really like. Well, she looks like a puppet. I looked it up like she was, with just some CG touches here and there. And that might have been a budget thing, because there's so many characters in that movie that they had to create, so many creatures. So I don't know. I'm not sure, but for me, it felt like a step backward in that case because maybe it's just because I first saw her as CG and then changing to a puppet just felt weird. Maybe whenever it changes, maybe it feels weird. Or I kind of felt that with the Puppet Yoda in Last Jedi, where I felt that, it was cool to see Frank Oz puppeteer a creature again, and I think people kind of complained about the way he looked. Like Yoda looked like he got work done in that movie too.
Yeah.
Even though like he's very close to how he looks at Empire Strikes Back, that they think, well, maybe it's the lighting. It's just hard to say. And I think part of it is that we're just so used to CG characters. Like we see Snoke in that movie and he looks so real and so convincing. ILM did a fantastic job on that. Where it's just hard to see a puppet, and at least for me, I don't want to speak for everybody because obviously you didn't notice the Maz Kanata thing. So maybe it worked for a lot of people. For me, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to see a puppet show up when I know that CG characters can just have better performances. And I think that's just how George thinks. Like the reason he went with CG Yoda is because he knew he could get a better performance. Like there's this behind the scenes of him taking forever to work with the animator. Like, no, you need to get this expression on his face. Like, because he's acting. Yoda's acting and George is directing. And you can't really do that with a puppet. You can blink the eyes. You can, whatever your hand, you can like scrunch up his face with your fingers. But that's about all you can do. And so I think George, as a director, as a storyteller, he just wants a better performance. He doesn't really care about how real it looks. He just wants the performance. And so I think with knowing that, sometimes it's hard for me to see puppets. People love practical effects, and not just in Star Wars and other like movies. I like them, but if it makes the storytelling, if it feels like it suffers it, or if it feels like it suffers as a result to me, I'm like, I'd prefer a maybe not quite photoreal CG character that doesn't quite look real, but is at least give me a better character to look at or performance. So I don't know. It's interesting that with all that I don't know. That's just an interesting thing to me. So I think the CGI Yoda works here. There's one shot actually I don't like the CG Yoda, but we'll get to that.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'll have to wait for that. Huh. Yeah, I do like it. It is, and like just watching this again as we're talking, it's like like I don't know, it's just like coming home. Like that's prequel Yoda. You know, it's like there he is. That's so cool. Yeah, I get it. That's really neat. I just pondering that, just the difference between puppets and CGI, and when they're kind of mixed in our day and age, you know, like they're a lot more mixed. It is, to me, it's always really kind of jarring. You could really tell when one is CGI and one is puppeting or a puppet. But yeah, and for me, it's weird. I agree. Like there's a lot of art in puppeting and stuff like that, which I appreciate. But yeah, it's weird to combine them sometimes. Whereas like episode 1, I don't know, that just never fazed me. Even now, it didn't faze me. You know, there's a blend between puppets and CGI. They just did a great job. So yeah.
I wonder if it's a matter of like I said, like the time when it came out. Because I'm thinking about something other than Star Wars. Maybe that'll be helpful to comparison. Because you look at the first Jurassic Park movie that came out just a few years before this, and it was the same thing as a mix between CGI and practical, and it didn't bother anyone then. Everyone, it's a good mix. It doesn't really bother me now to look at it. I like it, but when I looked at the newest Jurassic Park or Jurassic World film, I guess that came out, that had practical and CG mixed together, and that was hard to watch because like when I saw the practical ones, I'm like that really stood out. I go, oh, that looks. I mean, they still look great. It's a great practical model, but to me, I think this is a big thing for me, at least in movies, is consistency. Is that whatever world you're going to present to me at the beginning of the movie, stay in that world, and I'll be happy. I don't care how realistic it is. It could be, Beauty and the Beast. It could be a completely animated world. It could be very cartoonish and stylized. There could be nothing of the actual real world in it, but I'll accept the reality of the film if you're consistent with it. But if you break that, whether it's, like a good example for me is WALL-E. I don't know if you remember, watched that movie a lot, but if you remember, there's live action people in that movie. And when they first showed up, I was like, "Ooh, I don't like this. This looks weird."
Yeah,
because the live action people like slowly morph over the years into a CG person. It was just very odd. I was like, "No, like," but they're the only real thing in the movie. So why didn't I like it? It's like it's the reverse of the. It's the other side of the uncanny valley is when you have because everyone talks about realistic CGI looking bad because it looks too cartoony because like it's not quite realistic enough. Same thing happens when you have an animated character that is moving too realistically. If it's like rotoscoped or something, like if it's an exaggerated caricature, that's the drawing, that's the character. Like Peter Pan, he's got huge eyes and he's impossibly skinny and so he's exaggerated. If he moves in a very realistic way, it's still going to have that disconnect, even though it's realistic, right? So the animation has to be exaggerated as well. So that's the same kind of thing, I think, is that as long as it's consistent, if you're going to do puppets, just do puppets all the way. If you're going to do CGI, just do CGI all the way. It's when you mix them, that's when sometimes it works. And sometimes people mix them really, really well.
Yeah.
Like maybe Rise of Skywalker mixed it well because you didn't notice it. But for me, I noticed it. And I think at Jurassic World, I noticed it. And so it's like, sometimes it's just, I'd rather just be consistent and not get pulled out of the movie and look at something that's not either get a less than realistic CGI character, but I get a good performance, or look at a very realistic looking puppet and not get as good of a performance. I'm fine with both. Just give me one though. Just be consistent, I guess. That's how I look at it. That's just me personally. I don't know how many people can relate to that, but that's how I look at it.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, going back to older movies, I think it works better. Just because, the film camera quality wasn't as good. Like it's more grainy. So I feel like it's easier to cover up. Whereas like nowadays, it's so easy to tell when something's CGI because it's just so crisp and it is almost too real. It looks fake, especially compared to like modern cameras. But that's a theory. I don't know. But anyway, all I have to say, I think they did a good job. I appreciate CGI Yoda. And the last thing I was going to say is just I really appreciate Qui-Gon's confidence here. He seems to be the only one who's like so black and white. Like, no, this is it, guys. That was a Sith Lord. I have the chosen one. You guys need to buy this. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And it's interesting because, the Jedi will be portrayed as, well, the whole absolute thing, right? Like it's a Sith thing to say absolutes. And here, the Jedi, and that's the Jedi. They're like, no, maybe it's this. Well, let's think about it. Not that's a bad thing necessarily, but when we get I appreciate that in contrast to seeing them and just his confidence. And also, we learn again. I don't know if George even had this in his mind at all when this was happening, but in Clone Wars, we see later that at this point in the story, Qui-Gon's already known kind of what's coming. Like he's already working with the force priestesses on manifesting life after death, and he already knows there's darkness coming. There's a chosen one out there, which would make sense as to why when he sees Anakin, like, oh, this is it. I know it. But again, I don't know if George knew that when he actually was writing Episode 1, but he definitely intended it for the story anyway. Later on, as we find out in Clone Wars, so. This is kind of neat to see that where Qui-Gon's sort of like the only guy in the know here of like what the Force is really doing, and he's almost instructing them like, "This is the will of the Force, guys. I know this is coming."
And either way, whether George knew it or not, he made sure that whatever he did, in the present wouldn't interfere with the past. So like whatever he did on Clone Wars, he made sure that worked with what he did with Qui-Gon in the past in 1999. He made sure it was consistent. So even if he didn't have that idea back then, he definitely made it work. So that's good. That's a good point. I never really thought about that yet, but at this point, yeah, Qui-Gon is well on his way, or he's he's gotten as far as he could with his training there, with the shaman of the wills and the Force priestesses and all that. So
yeah, I appreciate it. It's kind of fun to see. It's just. I was thinking about Qui-Gon. He's the Jedi Calvinist. He's like, oh no, I know this is coming. This is Sabbaty here.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a good way to say it.
Whereas all the other ones are like,
yeah. It's so funny because like you're right. He is. For some reason when you say it, he's very. I use the word bold, but whatever you say, he's very matter of fact. He's very black and white confident. That's the word. Yeah. To me, that brought to mind him just stabbing the door at the beginning of the movie, just like it's such a Qui-Gon movie. So he's very just like, no, I got this. This is what we're gonna do right now. He doesn't really think and deliberate. He's again, that's something we see in Anakin, right? Like Anakin ideally grows up to be Qui-Gon, right? Like we talked about, without any Sidious influence, that's the kind of Jedi Anakin would turn out to be. And Obi-Wan's there just in the middle going like, can we, hang on guys, can we just analyze the situation? He's always a little more reserved and conservative of the two. But yeah, it's true. It's a good point that Qui-Gon is, even though at first he's kind of trying to do a soft sell to the Jedi and say, I think this might be the chosen one, that Yoda says, no, actually I know you, Qui-Gon, you're, like you said, you're confident. And he's like, yeah, I am, and later on in the scene, he's like, what? He is the chosen one. You must see it. Like he's so adamant in the next scene, the next couple scenes. So that's a good point. It's a good observation. Didn't really clock that before, but that's a good point.
Yeah, it's fun. It's I think his line "feel, don't think" is like summarizes him, right?
Yep.
Like,
absolutely.
Trust your instincts. Don't worry about it. Just go. Yeah. And Obi-Wan's the one who's always like, what? No, hold on.
I'm gonna think. Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna think, Qui-Gon. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Obi-Wan's arc in this film, is that he learns to become Qui-Gon, right? At the end of it, he becomes that reckless, by the end of it, he's the one who's can appreciate the lame character on the side of the road, the pathetic life forms, right? Anakin and Jar Jar. He grows, he decides like, I'm going to take on Anakin and I'm going to take up my master's mantle and I am going to train this kid. I think he's worth it. And he grows to love Anakin. And, in episode 2, he's, going to see Dexter, he trusts Dexter over the Jedi Council, the Jedi droids in that deleted scene where they don't know anything about Kamino, but he goes to Dexter. That's such a Qui-Gon move, right? And you get the feeling that maybe he learned, or maybe met Dexter through Qui-Gon, or through his adventures with Qui-Gon, he learns to become, a little more reckless, a little more bold, like Qui-Gon is. And, like Yoda says, Qui-Gon's defiance, I sense in you. That's Obi-Wan's arc. That's what he learns, is he learns how to become Qui-Gon. He learns how to become the guru in this movie. So it's cool to see that.
Boy, there you go. That could summarize Padme's story in this too. Since Qui-Gon's
everyone's trying to exactly. Everyone learns from Qui-Gon in this movie, which is so sad. We lose him He's such a great character.
Yeah. Boy, that is interesting. Yeah, but as we find out, he'll still revert back in times. Where he's frustrated with Anakin.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like he's still Obi-Wan.
Always
still
on the move.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
He's still butts up against that Qui-Gon idea sometimes, especially when it's exhibited with Anakin. But yeah, it's true.
Yeah. But it's fun. It's fun. I appreciate seeing that in Qui-Gon. So
All right, that's it for this episode. Join us in the next one as we continue our series on the Phantom Menace. As always, thanks for listening, and on to the next one.